Hey, I'm Dagny, and in this video, I want to share with you my experience with the Web3 Accra conference. Its main goal was to discuss the whole Web3 industry and possibilities for Accra, Ghana, and Africa at large. Now, when it comes to the types of people who were there, the majority of the audience were Ghanaians who are here. While the people who were on stage for the variety of panels were a mixture of Ghanaians, other Africans, as well as African diasporans from the UK as well as from the US. So the way I'm going to go about discussing it is I want to share with you certain panels or certain keynotes that occurred. And at least they're the ones that stood out to me, and the key takeaways from those, or the key questions that stood out to me that I think, if you are like me, who is intrigued by this whole Web3, blockchain, NFT, new technology, meta, whatever vibe, would be interesting things to continue thinking about in terms of how does Ghana, how does Accra, how does Africa, how does diasporans, how does we in this galaxy leverage and navigate this kind of, new era of technology we are gradually moving in. So one of the first panels had people who are primarily in the financial tech space. And they were all speaking on how, excited and enthusiastic we gotta be for Africa to be in Web3, because this is the way Africa's gonna get ahead. All right, that was the rhetoric that was being pushed at this conference. Now, remember, I'm here to encourage all of us to think for ourselves and consider multiple perspectives. So when I say stuff like that, I'm not indicting or judging from one side or the other. I'm giving you facts. I'm giving you takeaways. You know what I'm saying? You know how we do. There were 2 or 3 key takeaways from this one. The first one was the notion that there is actually a lot more developing and happening and experimenting with Web3 throughout the continent of Africa than we realize. The reason why we may not all realize this is because a lot of it is happening in isolated bubbles. Everyone's doing their own thing in their own ecosystem, in their own virtual ecosystem, as opposed to being a connected conglomerate, dynamic, we are sharing all the infinity stones that we have collected vibe. And so it does take a bit more effort if you want to get the pulse about Web3. It takes more effort to find that actually people have been doing it for some time now. It takes some digging to find them. Which means along the way, we kind of need to get together or get people to start collaborating more, because when you do that, some might end up reinventing the wheel, when if you had just connected with somebody else who's already developed the tool that you needed, you don't have to reinvent the tool. You could just use what they've already developed, But we'll get there, because as everybody in Web3 keeps on saying, we're so early. So I'm sure that will happen eventually. Another key takeaway from this particular panel about financial tech was that because it was financial tech, there was also talk about investing in Web3. So investing in all the different currencies and NFTs and equity and other businesses or startups and things like that. The point that was made was, with all of this great talk and excitement and projects, it does give the impression that this Web3 space is really for a niche community that can invest money in it that they can't afford to lose. Because at the time that this conference was done, this was during a bear market. There's a whole dip, like a real serious dip going on. And if you're talking, like in this conference, that you're focused on Africans leveraging Web3, but at the same time, you've already stated that there's a very large percentage of the entire continent's population that is living below the poverty line or slightly above the poverty line, which means they may not have the capacity to be throwing money they can lose. Yeah? Like they don't have that extra money that they would be comfortable with losing. So how do we make Web3 or this enthusiasm for Web3, how can it be genuinely accessible for the rest of the African population if, as a lot of people were saying in this conference, this technology should be the key to leverage and get Africa ahead? Then how does that work if it's kind of only accessible to a certain community that is on the smaller percentage side of the overall population? And that point was well taken without any real answer. It was kind of like, that is a great point, and that is a point that everybody, who's in the space, like in this room, should definitely take into account to figure out how we do that. Again, it's not terrible that there really was no answer or no suggestion of any kind of how we're going to do that. But I think if you are intrigued by the idea of how Web3 could be leveraged in Africa, that's a very key takeaway you got to think about that might not be part of the rhetoric and the conferences and the hype that we're seeing with Web3 in other parts of the world. Next, there was a discussion, or I guess semi-fireside chat interview vibe, with an individual who has developed an NFT collection. It's called the Royals NFT. And this collection is the first NFT collection that is focused on diversity and culture, as well as tourism. So what this collection is are graphic artwork that's depicting kente and Ankara fabric fashion. And when you purchase the NFT, you are included in this group, like a membership group, that now has access to attend a gala event in Accra for December, during Dirty December, where they're trying to, at least from what they're stating, it's going to be like another version of the Met Gala. So there's going to be a whole lot of culture and entertainment and food, and everyone's going to be serving looks. And then while these group members come to attend that gala, they also have a week of tours and activities and that sort of thing going on. And their purchase of the NFT gives them access to that. Plus, they purchase some of the stuff on the way. As well as there's a Discord group trying to maintain a community. And then there'll be other events happening throughout the year that they want to continue. And then this gala, I think it made it seem like this gala is going to be a yearly, an annual thing. And the interesting thing about, already, that's what is interesting about it, because not all NFTs have that attached utility or attached perk or benefit outside of the digital artwork that's now on your phone, right? Another thing was that allowing access, which is answering the previous question, allowing access for Africans, or in this case for Ghanaians, to be involved. So they were able to make it so that you don't need to own a cryptocurrency to purchase it. So you can purchase the NFT with regular money, like with a bank card or a credit card to get it. Then they also have payment plans, so you can purchase it over time. I thought this was pretty innovative, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it evolves and is maintained, because that is something that when it comes to NFTs, which are non-fungible tokens, I think that is what it stands for. And I have been looking to see if there is a possibility of me incorporating NFTs with my business, Bandole Muse, and wondering what would be the added perk or the added benefit with purchasing something like that. So seeing a project like the Royal NFTs, which has taken the initial thing that everybody else was doing of like, oh, we're doing these cool, 2D graphics, but adding a in-person experience, adding almost a foundation charity experience, adding these other things that make those who are purchasing it feel like they are a part of something, as opposed to it's just a piece of art, or this is supposed to be something I'm going to sell later or sell off later. And the added thing of making an effort to create a solution on how to make this accessible to others who are not already in the crypto space, I thought was a really big deal, because that is something that kind of is almost redlining the enthusiasm for Web3 if, like, the people you want to be involved don't have the capacity to afford it, or also just don't have the Wi-Fi capacity to be a part of it. So I thought that was cool. And yes, I did purchase a Royal NFT. So I'm telling you this because I actually have looked at the Discord board and see all the updates and Twitter spaces they've been doing. And I'm like, you know what, this is pretty cool. Next, there was one panel that had women, only women on it. And each of them work in the tech space in some capacity. And their main topic of discussion was answering questions about having women in the Web3 space, why it's important to have women in the Web3 space, why it's important to create space for women in the Web3 space, what do women bring to the Web3 space. And the takeaway I got from this is there's two sides to it, okay? One, just my takeaway by watching the panel, and then two, my takeaway from one of the questions or one of the comments that were brought up for that panel by the audience. So the first thing when I was watching this panel was, I thought it was great that they have a panel of women, because me being a woman, it was very obvious to me that the majority of the audience was men. And the majority of the panels were only men. Not to say there was no women in the room, but it's just like the women were a minority in number. So I definitely commend them for choosing you're going to dedicate an entire panel on women. What would have been nice though, is it's fine to have one question stating, can everyone please share with us, why do you think it's important for women to be in this space, and what do women bring to this space? That's fine. But to be honest, the rest of the questions should not be a repeat of that first question, which is what ended up happening. It would have been nice to have a balance between, sure, you're a woman, please tell us why do you think being a woman is important to be in this space? But I also would love to hear, what are your predictions about Web3? How do you see Web3 leveraged in Africa or Africa's diaspora? What have you worked on, and how has that moved the needle. Like, like similarly to the other panels where the other people, which were the men, none of the men were asked like, please explain to me why African men should be in the Web3 space, or please explain to us what do Black men bring to the Web3 space, or can you please explain if there's space for men in the Web3. But you know what I'm saying? Like, none of them had to talk about that. Instead, they could talk about how exciting it is and what they've been working on and how their bear market wallet looks and no. Well, for the women's one, they kind of ended up sitting there just repeating themselves. And I just felt, since with each of them introducing themselves, each of them are qualified to be sitting up there. Each of them have a plethora of experience in the space. It would have been nice to actually hear about that experience. I just felt there's more they could have shared if they were asked different types of questions. And let me know what you think about that. Because for me, that was on me. That was my take of like, I hear you, but like I don't have any notes on what is your perspective. You're saying women bring a different perspective, but then you actually never got the chance to share your perspective. You know? You did a lot of telling as opposed to showing in that particular panel due to the way and I don't know who was in charge of like what questions are asked or not or whatever, but due to the way that panel was navigated, it was more telling instead of showing. The second thing that came up during that panel, when the audience, it was open to questions. An audience member who was a man noted that they appreciated the panel, but they felt that the panel was full of women expats. So they felt that this was information that they could not use, and they would have preferred that this panel had more of a localized perspective for women, so that this would have been information that he could share with other women here or other Ghanaian women. And the response to that from the panel, which I think it was the moderator, who said this, was that that women here should just be mindful about building their own communities or looking for their own communities and teaching themselves. This hit home for me a little bit. So I was really interested to seeing what the response would be, and the response didn't really answer the question, or didn't really, I don't want to say push back, but didn't really give what it needed to give. I have observed a similar notion, narrative, or even questioning about, why should we listen to people who are not from here about what they claim we should or should not be doing, or how we should be doing something? What do they know? They're not from here. But when it comes to why should we listen to Black people who are not from Ghana telling us how to work things in Ghana? And I'll take note that, yes, it's true, on the panel, there were 4 women. 2 of them were from the US. And then the other 2 were Africans, but not from Ghana. So they're all Black. But since the majority of what they were talking about, since again, like I noted already, they didn't get a chance to share a whole lot about their experience or about their work. So a lot of what they were saying was just, it's very important to maintain space, to have space for women. Women can contribute quite a lot to the Web3 space. And we do need to encourage more women to be in this space, similar to how you're trying to encourage more women to be in the STEM space as well. I feel like that comment is at play in every aspect of this idea that Africa and Africa's diaspora is somehow coming together, bridging the gaps, creating this beautiful golden bridge of togetherness, united with each other, because it's difficult it is a challenge for all of us to figure out if we're on the same page. Similarly, even though, yeah, I'm in Ghana, but the way I speak and the way I look, it's very easy to claim, what do I know? I could not possibly be from Ghana. Why should we listen to you, Dagny? And I feel like this is where we may sometimes hinder our own progress. Because it makes me feel like in the US, the majority of education, the majority of advice, the majority of imagery doesn't have somebody, like for the longest time, did not have like a Black person or a Black perspective or a Black identity to it. And so for the majority of people, and this is not only a Black thing, Asian Americans have the same thing, throughout Latin America, but in America, in the US, probably have the same thing. Like, it's the same of like, you just adapt it to fit you. Since the majority of the audience were Ghanaians, who obviously are interested in seeing how can they leverage Web3. I think it is important to take note that because this is a new era of technology, which means the majority of rhetoric and the majority of stuff coming out of it is not coming from here. When you're hearing these experiences or you're hearing this advice, I feel it's on us to adapt it, implement it, experiment it so that we can be the ones who provide the localized perspective. Like, I just feel like that was the point of all of us coming to this conference, because we're so early in this. Is there an equivalent of women in the space here who have worked at it for long enough, or have mastered it, or have, researched it enough, or really embodied it, that they can also step up and be like, okay, this is how it works here? Has any of us gotten to that point yet? Because I got the sense we're all still learning. I also got the sense that anybody who was sitting up in that stage is also still learning. They may have made some money out of it, and maybe that's why they were given the microphone, but that doesn't mean they are the be-all, end-all expert on this. At least when I go to conferences or when I'm seeing people on stage, I do not view them as the only expert on this. Yeah? I view them as, one, I'm trying to get a sense of, are you sitting where I want to sit? So I can figure out, how do I decipher the information you're giving? Is this advice that really resonates with me? And if not, cool. If it is, then I take away what I can take away from it. So the notion that if there are no local people on the panel, then the information is moot. The information has no value. There's no reason for us to be listening to you, I think is an unfortunate mindset to take. Yes? While instead, all you really needed to take from this panel was, you may need to be very mindful of how you are navigating this space. If you are, which we always are, if you are in a position to invite people in, if you're in a position to hire people, if you're in a position to provide an opportunity, be very mindful of who you're doing that with. Understanding that if you look around the room and women are the minority in the room, when you know we're more than half of the population on this planet, there's a problem. Yes? That was the main takeaway from it. You don't necessarily need a Ghanaian woman to tell you that. You could have just looked around the room and do you see enough of your sisters out here? No. It doesn't matter the accent of the person who's telling you the obvious just by looking around the room. So I felt like I understand the sentiment of, yes, you want the information to be complete, like you want information to be localized. I understand that sentiment, but I also got the sense of like, you also just want somebody to tell you verbatim, step 1, 2, and 3 of what you need to do, so you don't have to think. And I just took note that like throughout this entire conference, it was kind of repeated that to do this, you got to think for yourself. We're not here to just tell you, oh, here's where you sign up, and then you can just sit back and do nothing. And so I think in a bigger picture, when we are looking into this, of course, I can connect this to, of course, for me, I can connect this to all kinds of things, even outside of the Web3 space. But since we're talking about Web3 in this video, I'll keep it to just that. All of the information you're looking at, whether it's podcasts, videos, newsletters, other people talking about this Web3 situation, majority of them are not local, right? The task in that is, you're learning for yourself, but also experiment so you can figure out how does it work locally. And maybe you can be the person, you can become the go-to person for how to adapt this locally. Do you see? Yes. Another side to that, for those of us who are for diasporans who do come up to this question or comment of like, why should I listen to you? You're not from here. What do you know? That also reminded me of a part of an interview Jay-Z did with Kevin Hart. And this is not me necessarily endorsing Jay-Z or Kevin Hart. It's just they noted this in the interview and I was like, ooh, that's a good point. This notion about privilege. Here in Ghana, it seems diasporans are considered privileged. But that's given this, like, is a privilege that others would love to have because you think the privilege is just money, but it's also a privilege that people should be ashamed or guilty or humbled for because it's money. And the way in which in this other interview, the way privilege was described was that it's a privilege to be able to give you the blueprint so you don't have to go through what I went through. It's a privilege to be able to give you the tools, the skills, the answers, the formula, the secret code, so that you can get past the door that I'm at and open the next one without having to take as much time as it took me to open the first door. That is a privilege. And vice versa. Like, it's not just diasporans only people who can teach. Diasporans also, you need to be teachable too and be open to being taught, or be open to the knowledge you receive from the people who are already here. So the mindset that if you're from another space or you have a different accent, anything you say is of no value, that's not really going to get us very far, you know? It's not. And I just can't help but take note that, like, there were men on other panels who had a different accent and nobody questioned them. Nobody questioned what they were sharing, even though it was obvious that they're not from Ghana. Some of them weren't even Black. But on the woman panel, obviously the few women in the room could not possibly, like, understand, like, it's giving, really? You sure about that? So just food for thought on that point, which is regardless of gender. Yeah. The next big takeaway for me was the panel and keynote on esports gaming. Did you know this whole esports gaming thing not only is a very big, profitable, lucrative business industry, but is also very big in this whole Web3 space situation. And, like, apparently Ghana has become the hub for esports in Africa. Did you know that? Hello. What was interesting about that panel was, one, it showcased how, giving you, I guess, a local perspective, it showcased Ghanaians actually participating in the Web3 space. The esports panel and presentation was the only one that felt more hands-on. We do have, like, an actual esports Ghana team that has been doing very well. Half of the team is women, and they played at this year, they played at the very first esports competition game at the Commonwealth Games. Now, I don't come from a UK or Europe perspective. Okay, so from what I understand, Commonwealth is up there with World Cup and the Olympics. So it's like a really big deal, very big deal. Another cool thing, or another takeaway I got from this was that the esports gaming industry is not only about gamers. So there is media, there's commentators, there's producers, music producers are involved in this, storytellers, writers, script writers are involved in this, content creators are involved in this, merchandise is involved in this, like assisting the team, all of those things, doing the events. Like there's so many other aspects to the industry that people here can get involved in and get paid for without ever having to play a video game. Which I thought was like, yo, there is a possible like option or answer to how do you get this space accessible to other people who are not just going to who don't have the capacity to just invest money they can't lose. They also presented a few of the challenges that they're still having to develop. So one, there is a challenge with Wi-Fi. So as much as they want to compete, the Wi-Fi connection here is not as strong. So they don't get to do like the live streaming and all of that kind of stuff, which is what they would like to do more of. Another thing when it comes to women in this space, having access to equipment is something that is needed, because apparently like it's usually the guys who have the consoles and stuff. So then the girls have to either go to their place to practice or borrow it, or it just sounds like it would be better if like they just had their own equipment, or there was other spaces, more spaces where you have equipment available. And then also there was a little discussion about having more African-centered video games to tell African folklore stories and things like that. And I was like, yes, we love to see it. So that was cool. So overall, if it's not obvious, I thought that panel gave an even more, a more well-rounded glance or look at what could be done in the Web3 space in the African context. On day 2, there was a gathering it kind of was more of like a meetup for the esports deal at this video gaming center, which was my first time going there. I go to like every aspect of the conference because I'm just intrigued and interested to see like what y'all got going on out here. So I went there and it was cool. So like if you're into gaming and esports and you didn't know that Ghana's the hub for it in Africa, and you didn't know about this space in Accra, well now you do, and you should totally check it out and check them out and totally support. The second event was the launch for Afrofuturism. Now, you may already know this, but if you don't, Afrofuturism is my thing. Like I geek out on Afrofuturism and African futurism. Like my business Bandele Muse is an Afrofuturistic boutique. I literally put the vibe in vibranium. Okay, this is my thing. So I'm not understating the fact that I was quite looking forward to what possibly was going to occur at this so-called launch of Afrofuturism. What was discussed in the panel this year, Afrocella's theme is Afrofuturism. But then the way in which they described it at the panel, culture mixed with technology and using technology to underpin Black power or Black culture. And then because the person who is a part of the Royals, in charge of or developed that Royals NFT collection that I mentioned, he gave a little more or elaborated a little more on that messaging by taking note of Web3 and NFTs are giving an opportunity for ownership, for Africans to have ownership of something, that you can maintain the ownership and possibly like leverage equity and royalties and generation and generational wealth with. When it comes to Afrofuturism, I did find it interesting that we are kind of defining it differently. And I will link, I've done a video talking on how I've been discovering or adapting to the differences that are now being made between Afrofuturism and African futurism. So I will put a link to that so you can check out that video if you're interested in this topic. I found their definitions to be like, okay, this is maybe another branch, because Afrofuturism and African futurism kind of remains in the area of, this is a philosophy of thought, this is a genre of literature, music, fashion, film. This is a vibe, an aesthetic, which some of it on the panel seemed like we're using Afrofuturism more of a vibe, trying to use the vibe to foster leveraging technology for power, or leveraging technology for ownership, or leveraging technology to take ownership of the power and the culture. So it's almost like, okay, maybe we're starting to, and let me know if this resonates as I'm trying to connect the dots, but we're starting to take this philosophy of thought and make it tangible and real in reality, like take it outside of the book, take it out of the music, take it not to throw away those things, but let's also have it so it's not just fantasy. At least that's the idea. Now, in addition to that, the conversation about ownership. And I had this, the notion of ownership, or that this technology enables us to have ownership that we've been deprived of. Yes? I had a conversation with my parents about this conference and this particular topic. And they were able to articulate something that I was feeling and had taken note of, but had yet to put it into the exact words I wanted to put it into, which is why intergenerational conversations, intergenerational interactions and bonding and friendships and relations are so important. So can we please pause and give a round of applause for older folks who are not triggered by having conversations with younger people and actually are open to learning from younger people and vice versa. Thank you. The evolution continues. We appreciate it. But the way they articulated it, which I was like, yes, was that's fine to say, oh, this technology is great because it enables Africans to take ownership, to have ownership that they've been deprived of, whether it's ownership of their culture because everyone else somewhat appropriates it, ownership, right? Or ownership of things because apparently, like for so long of Africa's history, it's been colonized and exploited, yes? But, okay, let me rephrase this before I share this perspective. This is just another perspective for us to add to the puzzle of all the things we're thinking about, connecting the dots to figure out how can we configure this for it to be mutually beneficial for all of us. So when I share this, I'm not sharing this to indict or judge or rebut what was said at the panel or what the people at the panel believe. This is just another perspective, another layer, another nuance to add to the discussion, which we've been doing throughout this video and talking about how does this technology truly can benefit us. If we're looking at this technology to claim that this would enable us to take ownership, could this enable us to be nibbling at the fringes of wealth? Let's let that marinate for a moment. Let's let that simmer for a moment. I'm going to say it again. Looking at this Web3 technology for generational wealth building, and potential ownership leveraging? Is it focused in the right place? Or are we nibbling at the fringes of wealth? What do we mean by that? You're taking ownership. You have ownership of this graphic digital artwork that you can only view on your phone, on your smartphone where your wallet, right, your Web3 wallet is. But you have that, but you still don't own the gold mine in your country. You don't own the land you're sitting on. You don't own the bauxite. You don't own the rubber. You don't own the diamonds. You don't own, need I go on? You don't even own your forest. You don't even own the Achimota forest anymore, if we're going to make it in particular to Ghana. Isn't that like the last forest in Accra? What do you all have against trees? Sorry, but I digress. But do you see? So if you own this NFT on your phone, does that really qualify for wealth? Does that put you at the same level of wealth as this other list of things that you are sitting on but do not own? And if we are claiming that we're trying to leverage Web3 to take ownership or take back ownership, are we going to utilize the technology to take back ownership of the Achimota? Are we going to use Web3 to take back ownership of the Achimota forest? Is that how we're going to take ownership of the gold mines, the diamonds, the rubber, the bauxite, the timber? Is that how we're going to utilize the technology? Are we focused on leveraging the technology in that way? Questions that need answers, yes? So it's not to say that being enthusiastic about Web3, whatever, in this context of the idea of ownership, it's not silly to look at it in that way. But in the African context, we got to also pay attention to, wait a minute, we've always been sitting on the wealth. So us looking at this technology, at this virtual thing, does it really amount to the wealth that we're still sitting on but is still being exploited? And I don't mean exploited because somebody else is taking it, exploited because we continue to just give it away. Will leveraging this technology enable us to stop taking everything we've always had for granted? And I think in the context of Afrofuturism and African futurism, in the fantasy stories or the magical stories that we've created in those genres, we do figure that out. So if this is the beginning of us taking these concepts and making them into real life, then it's quite encouraging. Like, yeah, awesome. Okay, let's keep on tinkering. Let's keep on figuring it out. If not, if this is just hype, if this is just, oh, we're all excited about some new gadget and using buzzwords for the new gadget, but everything else is still the same, then I feel like we possibly have missed the point. So overall, I thought the conference was interesting. I'm very grateful I found out about it before it passed, so I could actually attend, because that's what ends up usually happening here, where I'll hear about something after the fact, and I'm like, darn, I missed it. So I'm grateful, so grateful that I found out about it before so I could go. Let me know in the comments, because as usual, I want to hear from you. Did you go to this conference? Did you know Web3 was a thing? Are you even interested in this? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your perspective. What do you think on this stuff? Let's continue the conversation. Thank you so much for watching. Be safe. I'll see you next time.